Hello everyone, and welcome back to another Strategoi video. Ryan here with a continuation of our, up to this point, pretty decent Worlds coverage with at least the teams that were involved. We're trying to extend this coverage a little longer here, even though it's a month since Worlds ended, because we know that there are more stories to be told, and we have access to, obviously, the teams that we already interviewed, plus some other people in the meta here, that we just felt like if we didn't cover some more, of what happened and people's thoughts, it would be a missed opportunity. So picking back up where we left off, we want to start actually here with this interview that I ran with the two of the judges, Gareth Thomas, who I believe was the head judge, and then Michael van Eeckhoute, my buddy from the local scene, who you'll see me, introduce both of these guys in just a minute here. In the meantime, please feel free to like, share, and subscribe to help boost the signal for the channel, and join us in the Discord and comments section. Jonas unfortunately couldn't be here for this video. He's out of town, and for a series of these videos that we'll be doing, but hopefully we'll get him on sooner than later. And without further ado, let's jump straight into the interview. All right, so we're doing a new setup today for the first time ever since Jonas is out of town. I'm trying to record with my Mac here using a headphone setup and some third-party plug-in stuff to allow me to record internal audio. So hopefully this comes out all right for you guys. We've had some complaints about the audio quality, especially when I'm hosting and Jonas isn't involved. He's got a PC. But anyway, I want to introduce my guests here today. Gareth Thomas here, who often goes by just Tom, not to be confused with the Tom Makes that people might know from Worlds, is, correct me if I'm wrong, Gareth, but you're from England originally, and then you've been living in California for 20 years now, is that right?
Good way to insult your guest straight away. I'm from Wales.
Oh, shit, okay. Oh my God. Well, all right. Well, I've already fucked that one up.
And now you can say that Michael's from France, and we're off to a great start.
Yeah. Well, yeah. All right. Okay. So what's the verdict? Do I start over again, or do we? What would you prefer?
I'm fine with it. It's funny.
Okay. All right. So. You know what's funny is I've got so many other things in my head right now, and I'm going to be honest, my differentiation between an English and Welsh accent is none. Those two accents are much closer than the Scottish and Irish accents that I barely also know. But anyway, I am, as the full-on American here, am expected to not know these things, I guess. So my apologies from my whole country, and hopefully I'm not the first person that's gotten it wrong with you. Anyway, Gareth, tell us a little bit about, or Tom, we'll go with Tom for the rest. Tell us a little bit about how you landed in California before we move on to Michael.
So I actually moved to the US first for grad school, went to university out here, and then got a job straight out of PhD in California, and haven't left. Met a wife, have a family. I've been at the same job for 18 years. So,
nice.
Yeah,
what's your PhD in? What career are you working in? What field?
Econometrics, which is statistics for economics. I suppose.
You're gonna. This is crazy, but I'm literally just done with rebooting my career in econometrics too here in the Netherlands, and am looking for work right now. So we have more in common.
Oh wow!
than maybe I realized going into this. So wow, there we are. I'm gonna have to maybe pick your brain a little bit because I'm having some a little trouble getting a job here in Europe with a residence permit necessary. But anyway, we'll talk about more statistics and data stuff. Maybe it'd be great to have you on for another video because I try to do a whole math hammer and probabilistic kind of spin on the channel when I can.
Oh, excellent. Yeah. Absolutely.
And then on to my good friend Michael van Eeckhoute. Michael is a friend that I met at the very first tournament I ever played, which was his tournament over in Antwerp, and which is... just as it turns out, also where I met Jonas, not at the tournament, but through random Facebook group stuff. I went and played my first game ever with Jonas, with him not even knowing who I was. Next day, I ended up at a tournament of Michael's, and I think we played against each other for the only time at a Bloodstorm event a few months later, where I was playing Ideneth Double Turtles and you were playing your Gits Spiders list, right? And
Hmm.
that was a fun time. And then we've just bumped into each other from time to time at either tournaments or you dropping by to obviously be one of the refs at Worlds. So, Michael, tell us a little bit about your background, if you could, for us.
So yeah, I'm from Belgium. I basically got into the hobby just about when Age of Sigmar launched. And when I started out, there was like no community for the game because everything imploded because fantasy was gone. And then I started out making Facebook groups so people could contact each other and running events in Antwerp. And then I kind of got stuck in with the community. And that's also how I met you, how I met Tom, and so many other great people here. So yeah, it's been fun the last couple of years.
Yeah, I guess on the surface, even though obviously you and Tom Meekes have a bit of a different approach to how you do stuff, you guys fulfill very similar roles in our the two communities, in the Dutch community and the Flemish community. Is there also a Michael of the of Wallonia, of the French speaking half of Belgium, that's kind of running tournaments and kind of keeping that side of the community together, or are you kind of still involved with that yourself?
There's some guys in Wallonia that run things, yeah, but I can't really pinpoint it to one specific person. But there's like a club in At,
Yeah,
that region. That's all. It's been very active. I think my first big Age of Sigmar tournament was right there.
yeah.
It was like a 30-person tournament, and that was like the big event of the year back then. Um, but I don't know a specific person, but they're very active. I mean,
Yeah,
they have a very active community down there.
yeah, very competitive. And then there's obviously the French-speaking part of that community, and I've never been to one of their tournaments, but it is one of the ones that comes up on the tournament websites that we have over here quite often. And I have to imagine you can get by with just English in those tournaments. Have you ever been to one over in At?
Yeah, it's been a while now, but especially in the early days of Age of Sigmar, I went there a lot to those tournaments because there was not a lot to do except for my own tournaments in the Flanders.
Yeah.
Um, you can get by with English, yeah, but most of them use the French rule books
Oh, yeah.
and army books, so that sometimes can be problematic because certain rules are written differently or FAQs are made differently in those languages. So yeah, that's sometimes a problem, but English is fine for the most part.
Right. Well, while that we're on that topic, have either one of you ever had to kind of rule using like someone's arguing a point from one of the other language battle tomes, and then you have to figure out a good rules solution, or do you usually just say at the kind of tournaments you guys would be working at, we're this is an English language tournament. It's an English language company originally. These battle tomes take precedence, and then just kind of forget about the French or German or whatever versions of the books. Have you guys had experiences having to kind of navigate those problems?
Not really. 99% of my TOing is done in the US, where language isn't really a problem. I do head judge for the Las Vegas Open, which has a lot of foreigners coming, and we do have. I don't think it's a rules language thing. It's just some countries play some rules or interpret some rules differently, and so you have some issues where, like, oh, in our country we always play it this way, and I'm like, well, sorry, but here we play it differently. Sorry, you didn't understand that, but but it's not necessarily due to a language difference in the rules themselves. It's just the way that different communities interpret things is always different.
Right. I assume in California, if you had to pick one state in the U.S. that's largely Spanish speaking as a second language, California would probably be one of the better choices. Have you ever even seen a Spanish language battle tome floating around there? Like, is that even a
No.
thing? No, I wouldn't expect
No.
it. But I suppose it's possible. Michael, do you have any sense for like the French speaking, or do either of you have a sense for the French speaking populace in Canada? Like, I'm trying to think of places where this might become an issue, or Switzerland maybe with multiple languages going on there, or do you? That's maybe what is it? It's 3 or 4 languages in Switzerland that are kind of primary languages. I imagine that can be a problem, but you just don't see it too often. I suppose it makes it easier when it's so obvious that the main language that the books are written in is English.
Yeah, I think that's the main guideline always. I mean, and like Gareth said, or Tom, like with Worlds, you do have some issues where people come from a certain community and they play a rule differently. But in general, I mean, the English rules are the guideline, and that's it.
Right. So, well, just real quickly, like let's kind of cover how you guys got involved with Worlds before we actually cover Worlds in the first place. So, what's kind of like leading up to that? My understanding, Tom, is that you've been quite like having a high profile amount of TOing and refing in general just for a long time. Not just obviously for big events, but also like you said in California and where else. What's kind of like, how did you get on to the Worlds radar? Have you been basically doing Worlds the whole time it's existed, or have you been doing it for just a limited number of years since?
This was my first one.
Okay.
So Tom Maggins got in contact with me. I can't exactly remember how he heard about me, but yeah, I have, well, this year I've done LVO. I'll be doing Nova, which is the US's second largest event. I'm going to do the Games Workshop Grand Final in November. A few of the US Opens for Games Workshop, and then Worlds as well. So I'm involved with a lot of large tournaments and small ones. I was looking through BCP the other day. I think I've TO'd 30 events over the past 18 months. So 2 a month over.
That's a lot.
So,
are you playing it?
Yeah.
Like, do you get a chance to play much? I mean, how does that interact with this kind of authority figure responsibility? Like, I know Tom Maich is here, doesn't get to play in tournaments very often because he's spending so much time organizing them. And then you start to wonder, does that mean that you have to be putting in your gaming time outside so that you can be a better ref and a better, a judge for different things, so that you are keeping up with the rules and interacting with them in the game itself? Or where do we sit kind of on that experience spectrum for what's best for a TO or a ref?
So I've pretty much retired from playing competitively. But in the US we have the ITC, which is the ranking system. I was best corn player 2 years in a row. I think I'm going to lose that this year, simply because I'm not playing enough. I get occasional RTTs in, and I may be playing 1 or 2 GTs a year, and that's it. A lot of the events where I say I'm TO, I actually, like the GW events, etc., or LVO, I'm just head ref, and that involves actually just watching a lot of games.
Yeah.
And so even though I'm not playing, I'm actually participating and experiencing more armies than I would do as a player, probably. And, I'm pretty involved on a day-to-day basis, keeping up with the community, so... I don't think playing is necessarily that important to keep up with the rules. You can do it without playing. And personally, I actually prefer judging and TOing than playing competitively. I mean, I love the game as a casual thing, but from a competitive point of view, I prefer to be involved as the TO judge than as a player.
Do you find yourself, like, if you're not being actively called upon to answer questions, do you find yourself... like you hear someone use a rule and you're like, that sounds a little fishy, where you have to go up and look it up, and you don't necessarily interrupt anyone while you're doing that, but then is that a way to kind of stay on top of things?
There's 2 ways that you can be a judge. You can have what's called active judging or passive judging. Games Workshop, for example, insists on active judging, so they have 5 or 6 judges walking around. If they see a rule being played incorrectly, they will stop the game and say, hey, no, you can't do that. Whereas a passive judging is just, you're there for whenever the players call you over. And if you see something, you don't interrupt the game. So somebody can get away with whatever they want as long as the judge doesn't, their opponent doesn't call them over. But from just keeping an eye on things, if you're under either approach, you're still walking around observing. Right? And I have a fair amount of experience now that 90% of times that I see it, that a rule is being played wrong, I just know it's being played wrong. I don't need to look things up. But occasionally, somebody says, "Oh, these hit on twos." You're like, really?
Yeah.
Do they? That doesn't seem right to me. And so, I've got all the terms on the app. Just look up the war skulls and say, no, that's not right.
Right. Yeah. Before we move on to you, Michael, that just the one thing that I have my own personal experience with this kind of thing is, and I can imagine it's even stronger for you guys, is like I've made a point. I've always loved battle tomes. I've always loved rules and being kind of that guy. Of course, I am actively playing and never have judged one of these events, but in having all the battle tomes and then analyzing all of them, breaking them down, you get pretty used to what kind of things are within a standard deviation of what GW would allow a unit to do. And then if I hear someone say something that sounds like you just said about hitting on twos, you start to say, eh. Or like if they talk about re-rolling ones, that's not very popular in third edition books anymore. And so if I hear that, it immediately peaks like a red flag where I start to say, I got to double check that. That sounds too good to be true.
Yep.
Wholly within, not wholly within, successfully cast, successfully cast and unbound. These kinds of like little things that are so easy for people to miss, myself included. Is this an experience that both of you guys have in kind of refining that, being on top of everything? Is that on the right track there?
Yes.
Yeah, Michael, what's your kind of interaction been with this? I mean, I know you to be also a player too. I don't know if you play actively more than Tom does nowadays, but do you find that you learn more from being in the game itself, or from this kind of watching other people do it? Where do you kind of sit on that spectrum we were talking about?
Well, I mean, playing the game, it does help, I think, for some stuff, but gotta be honest, I mean, there's like, 26 armies now in the game? My local meta doesn't include all those armies, so there's no way that I will ever play them all. And I think tournament-wise, I'm kind of on the same level as Gareth just mentioned, Tom, sorry. Like 5 events a year or something, max. So you do have to, get to know the rules yourself. I had to study a bit for Worlds. I have to admit, I had to read those battle tomes and just get to know those things. But of course, there's general outliners, like you just said. Yeah, I mean, surely some things are within standards and to be expected. So yeah.
Right. So, like, for example, Khorne being able to move within 3 inches as just multiple rules. That's something that you're like, oh, I should remember this. This is outside of the normal way that the game plays. Or the entering a garrison and someone standing within 3 inches of it, and then all of a sudden you're in combat, like entering from the other side of that garrison, feels a little counterintuitive because usually we think you can only charge your way into combat, but that's how the rules currently work. So it's one of those things that it creates feel-bad moments sometimes if people aren't on top of that stuff. And I feel like that's part of what the Worlds players also had to do, is read through not only the rules of the other armies and get to know them, but also the FAQ and commentary for Worlds itself. Did you guys have a hand in getting that written? Were you on the team with Tom Meches to establish that? I think Jeffrey might have been involved with that too. Or was it just kind of after the fact? Okay. So what does that process look like leading into Worlds? Is that a weeks-long process? Is there already an established FAQ that you're adding to? Then this is, for those people at home, this isn't a separate FAQ that's only for Worlds that covers extra things that GW hasn't covered in their FAQs or designer commentaries. But yeah, what's that process look like?
So post-Worlds last year, so a year ago, Tom decided that the Worlds FAQ should be a living document that is updated throughout the year and should be available to anyone who wants it. So he got together with a few of us, myself included, and another American TO, Judge Maddie, and then Jeff, etc. Basically the Worlds ref team that you saw at Worlds. And I created the website, or bought the domain AOSFAQ.com, so you can anyone can go there and see all of the FAQs that we write on a weekly basis. Any time there is a new set of rules put out by GW, a book, a GHB, whatever it is, we will write our version of the FAQ. A lot of the time that lines up with the one that GW will eventually write. GW has been writing FAQs a month after release. We tend to do it within a few days after release. So that has been done, for the last year. So then when Worlds came around, we didn't have to do anything really. It's just this website that we've been maintaining for the past year. That is the Worlds FAQ.
Right. Michael, were you involved in that too?
No. I wasn't really involved with the FAQ actually. No. I think it's a bit a story of too many cooks if you put too much people on it. I think because you already have a bunch of great minds working on it, so I think it worked out fine. So yeah.
Right. Like we've been meandering around this, but I don't want to forget to ask you how you got involved with being a ref for Worlds and like how, because obviously Tom knows you from a local in a local sense too. For those that don't know at home, the distance between the Netherlands and Antwerp is not far. You can get from Rotterdam to Antwerp. What is that train ride? It's not. It's like no more than an hour. It's super short. So we're basically neighbors. We play in each other's tournaments. You come to the Netherlands often. So you were already friends with Tom. But obviously he didn't just pick friends. In fact, you're the only one that I think he picked that he knew from locally. The rest of the judges were, you mentioned Maddie, Tom, and then she's from the States too as well, right?
Yes, she's in the East Coast. So
okay, and then I'd never caught his name. I saw him walking around. The other guy, what was his name, and where was he from?
Charlie.
Charlie.
In which country?
From Italy.
Italy. Okay. So I don't know that Tom necessarily knew these people unless he met them at Worlds last year before. Michael, obviously that puts you in some high caliber company. Did you feel like this was not too above your call and for all this stuff? You mentioned having to study and everything. Do you feel like this is opening doors for you to go do it in like kind of a more international stage? And would you say yes to going out to like the States or something if that came up?
Yeah, it's a bit daunting, I must admit, because I joined last year for Worlds in Prague.
Right. Yeah.
Basically, so like you mentioned, Tom already knew me. He knew what I did for tournaments. He knew what I did for the community. So he knew I was involved with the game. As far as I understand it, the organization was in a bit of a pickle last year. There were some shifts in the organization, and they needed to make a ref team on the spot, basically. And so I joined the ref team in April, so about 2 months, month and a half in advance of Worlds. That's when I joined. So I was kind of dropped in the middle of it, and I joined in. And like last year, it went fine, but it was an eye opener for sure. It was the level of competitiveness it's another it's another play field than what I'm used to.
Right.
But then for this year, Tom asked me to join again, and I was happy to. But I have to say that the level of skill for the players for the event, it was even higher this year. So it was daunting, and Tom really wanted to make a really competitive ref team as well this year. Last year we already had some great guys. We had Charlie already joining us. We also had another Michael from France who couldn't join us this year, but he was also great. But there was also some local guys from Prague that were also helping out. This year he handpicked some refs because he really wanted to have the best and create a great professional environment, and I think it shows.
Yeah, that was the kind of consensus amongst everyone that I talked to. And while you're kind of like hitting on the idea of the competitive level being higher, and like another question that kind of comes up easily with something like this is how many refs is the right amount of refs? But something I heard through the grapevine, I can't remember if Tom Meek has told me or I heard it's through someone else, is that maybe for your guys' perspective, and let me know if this is true, you didn't necessarily need to be jumping in to correct all these people that don't know the rules like you would at a more casual tournament. Like the level of knowledge is also pretty high from this standard of player. And so it creates a different interactive environment. Maybe that lowers the amount of judges that are necessary for this big of a thing because, yeah, it's a ton of people, 24 teams of 8 people, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they can't self-regulate most of the time. What was kind of, am I on the right track there? What was y'all's experience with that?
So there were two parts to being a judge at an event. One is spotting that rules are wrong or being asked to judge on a rule being wrong. But other times there were just times where two players disagree. You know, can this model see another model? Is this within 3 inches? Is it outside of 3 inches, etc.? And I would say that more than any other event I've been to, which is quite a few, Worlds was more the latter. It was, there were very, very few disagreements on rules. All of the players there knew the rules. I mean, I tended to be doing the sort of higher up tables, the teams that were better placed than the lower ones. So maybe that was a slight bias. But it was most of the interactions I had with players were, hey, can you just check whether this is in range or out of range, etc. Instead of some of the dumb questions you get at bigger GTs or less competitive GTs, I suppose.
When that's happening, do you guys pause the clock? How does the clock interact when a TO is brought in or a ref?
It depends on the situation. The pack did have rules on how the clock should be treated. So if one player calls over a ref for a rules question, then it is on his time. But if you get called over and it's literally just a disagreement on whether this thing is in a range or out range, I would usually just pause the clock because that's not a specific player that's asking for the clarification.
Right.
Yeah, same. Yeah.
Yeah, Michael, I think you came over to my table once to resolve something when I was playing Ireland, and I think you did something similar where you paused it for a bit while we resolved something. He was asking you for a rules clarification. I don't know what obviously I was playing for Team Serbia as a merc, and, you try to be on top of the rules, but I can tell you right now I didn't read the whole FAQ. And I certainly didn't read every bit of the rules pack. You kind of pick and choose things as they come along. Now, obviously, some more competitive players than myself probably did kind of rigorously read through everything. Did you find that there were a number of players that were asking questions that they would have known the answers to had they read everything, you guys?
So, let me give you the opposite of that. Okay?
Sure.
This is one of my favourite stories. So Denmark won, and Denmark were far and away the most prepared team there. They were just a machine. And in one of their games, there was a very, very, very technical interaction between two special rules that only these two units have. So it's an interaction that just never happens in the game at all. But it came up. And they came up and asked me, how should this be ruled? And I just stood there and said, actually, I have no idea. I'm going to have to think about this because it's complicated. And the Danish player said, no, actually, we know how you're going to rule it because we asked you in January, 6 months ago, in Discord, how you would rule it. And this is what you said. And he had a printout of my response to that exact question. So, yes, some players didn't know the rules, but then the Danes were completely prepared and knew absolutely everything and had the printouts of the judges' responses, which I thought was hilarious.
Can you tell us what the rules interaction was? What was it?
I can't even remember now. It was some fight on death and some other thing. I can't even remember what it was. I was just so dumbfounded. On the flip side, let me think. I believe it was France v Italy, and it was Iron Jaws against Zinch. Italy was Zinch, France was Iron Jaws, and the French Iron Jaws player was very good. One of the best Iron Jaws players I've seen. I was very impressed with him. But the Italian, and Zinch should walk all over Iron Jaws. The entire Italian player lost the game round one, essentially, because he didn't know how garrisons work.
Okay.
And the Iron Jaws player, top of one, jumped his mega boss on foot with Destroyer into a garrison and was in combat with the entirety of the Zinch army. And Destroyer did what Destroyer does. And and he's just... and the Italian player called me over, like, are you allowed to jump into a garrison to get into combat? Like, yeah, that's been a rule since 3.0 was released 2 years ago. This isn't a Worlds thing. This is the rules of Sigma. So yeah, that was one where he really should have known better.
Yeah, for what it's worth, I really wish they would change that rule. Like GW would officially, so that it feels more intuitive. Like what you see on the tin is you have to charge someone, you have to make a successful charge roll. But it is what it is. You're right that is rules as written. Michael, did you see any examples of someone that was either super poorly prepared or super well prepared, and any interesting stories thereover you want to tell us about?
Let me think. Not specifically, I think. I saw one player that basically had never played against that army, against Blades of Corn before. I mean, I thought that was a bit of a red flag. I didn't really understand how you can, compete and never know the interactions of that, the rule of that army, especially in this meta. But not really anything else that jumps out. I mean, most of the rules, most of the judgments that I had to make were related to measuring things or time issues. Make a call how we can resolve the game before the clock runs out. That sort of stuff. But most of the rules were very well interpreted, I think. Yeah.
That's good.
Also, I mean, going back to something that you were saying earlier, Michael, that how it was daunting being involved with a high pressure competitive thing. There is a difference between being a ref at Worlds as opposed to running your own tournament. In that we had a team, right? We didn't need to know the rules of every single army because there were 5 of us. And so if I didn't know something, I could just walk over and ask for a clarification from someone else who I thought would. And that makes a big difference compared to running your own, 30-man GT. It's generally just you by yourself. And so everything is down to you. Having a team makes a big difference.
Oh yeah, definitely. I could really depend on you guys. I mean, that was a big help, for sure. Yeah.
So you were talking about the corn interaction, and this year is going to be, at least from what all accounts would seem to suggest, quite different than what next year is going to be, in the sense that we just had a slew of battle tomes come out, some with more FAQ support and some with less. And some that didn't make it quite under the cutoff date. So Soul Blight and OBR being 2 of the most notable ones, but technically, I guess Seraphon in a sense. But next year, and obviously we had a 6-month GHB too leading into this. Whereas next year we're, for what we can tell, a full year GHB and probably not that many new battle tomes, all things considered. We'll have those 2 armies. Plus, obviously, Seraphon in Cities, Feck, and then if GW releases a new book, a new army, and/or just like a last-minute new battle tome before 4th edition kicks in for an army or 2. But otherwise, I think we're going to see a totally different field of people preparing for something with tons of time to let it soak in. Like, can you guys touch in on that topic and say, like, what the kind of expectations would be from what you saw from Worlds, what you thought this year, what you thought it was going to be with all that kind of tumult going into it, with all the new rules and people having to quickly adjust to them, versus what you expect it to be next time around?
I think the rules cutoff date being so early for Worlds meant that it wasn't much of an issue. I would argue, had Soul Blight or Archaic Bone Reapers been allowed, then that would have been very disturbing to both the meta and the understanding of the rules. So I'm glad that they weren't allowed. But 6-month GHB, but Worlds was kind of right at the toe end of that 6 months. So most of the players had 4 months of practice with it. That should be enough if you're on a Worlds team or if you're on a competitive Worlds team. In general, I like the fact that we're going to have a year, and yes, it looks like Cities are going to be coming out sooner rather than later, given all of the previews that we've seen. Maybe Feck will be towards the end of this year. So then, what are we going to see in the spring? I don't think there will be a new battle tome, but maybe there will be sort of these Dawnbringer things. There'll be Regiments of Renown will be released. We'll get sort of if you think of towards the end of second edition, we had the Broken Realms books that did introduce new rules, etc. So maybe we'll see some of that. You could definitely see them wanting to give orcs some sort of boost with some sort of rule set in a Broken Realms type thing. But they shouldn't disturb things too much, not as much as we've seen in the first half of this year, certainly. So it should be pretty settled, which is, good.
Michael?
Yeah, I tend to agree. Obviously, we still have a battle scroll in the middle of all that that could shake things up. If we see like certain spam builds, then certainly those can go out of the window. If a unit gets a points hike or something. But I hope, when we're talking about having a full year with this JHB, maybe it gives players the time to readjust their armies. The meta might settle for a few months, and then maybe players can reinvent their army to counter things or shake things up. That could be fun. But who knows? We'll see.
Right. It does give people more time to experiment, right? So, and then for the people to respond to those experiments, like some of those Danish lists were kind of out of left field, and people obviously, even if that would have caught on eventually, it didn't have enough time to catch on, so that everyone else could react to what they were doing from seeing tournament reports from around the world and such. So maybe that's either a plus or a minus, depending on how your team functions, I guess. But yeah, Tom, what did you want to add there?
I was going to say that from what we've seen from the previews of the new GHB, which is the GHB that will be in use, a lot of the missions have some quirks and twists to them. Not as random as they were in the old GHB, but there's certainly a lot of planning and thought that needs to go into the how you play the new missions. A lot of them have, again, I'm going to use the twists without meaning twists and turns, but they have some twists in there that can catch unprepared players out. And I think we're going to see that in tournaments for the next 3 months or so, where players are going to lose missions because they don't understand how the mission works.
Mm-hmm.
By Worlds, it should all be solved. Certainly, again, the competitive teams will know the correct play for every single mission, which again is great. You don't want people losing out because they don't understand how something works. You want people to lose because they just were a worse player.
Right. Yeah, something that's interesting about this, like, kind of guiding this discussion is I keep thinking of things that are important subtopics of World's competitiveness that maybe don't actually fall under you guys' umbrella. For example, the pairing system. I don't think you guys actually had to interact with that very often, right? Maybe clarifying how the alpha betas get assigned or something. I know we had to call someone over for that once. Or then, obviously, the meta and list building, that in list submission, maybe you guys did have to look through all the lists, but I know that on the teams, we were kind of doing it as a group effort. Like, we were assigned to do a certain number of teams and double-check things. I don't know how much of a hand you guys had in that. And then, just the choice of battle plans. So you were just kind of referencing the more the less reliable battle plans like twists and turns. You guys didn't have a say in what the team captains voted for. So it's interesting, right. How you guys actually interact with this. You guys are kind of this background process that's running to make sure the rest of the things work. But there's so many other moving pieces in Worlds that make it competitive and make it actually function. Like this year, I think pairings was probably is always important, but pairings with so many missions going on at once seem to be such a huge influence on who did well. Do you like that you guys are divorced from so many of these elements? Do you feel like it would be better if we had less of that was pulling it out, and then it was just more the core rules of the game and the core interactions that determined who won? Do you have a particular take on any of this?
Yes. I personally think that all tournaments should be dictatorships, including Worlds. I think it'd be better if there was just one person or a team of, small team of people who said, this is how Worlds is going to be run. I think leaving it up to the captains to vote on all of these decisions is a bad idea. personally, I don't think Twists and Turns or Lurker's Blow should have been played at Worlds. Seems insanity to me. I literally have never ever played either of those two games or had them at any event that I've been to. Worlds was the first event I've been to that used those two plans, and I have to admit I had to look up the rules for them to remind myself because I'd just never seen them before. So yeah, but on the flip side, it's particularly when you do as many events as I do, just being told, hey, just turn up and referee instead of organizing everything is nice.
Yeah.
So yes, one person should be in charge, but I'm glad that one person's not me.
Yeah.
How about that?
Yeah, agreed. That's really nice.
Michael, do you have a sense for, like, and I watching some of Honest Wargamer streams on the topic too, I know that there was a lot of discussion over that, again, those missions shouldn't have been a part of it, maybe, why did the captains pick this, and so forth, and that this kind of idea that what true, like, this comes from like a Spike personality profile, but true competitiveness has to do with more being good with what you do and not necessarily being the result of how things play out in the game, taking out as much of that randomness as possible. But we are, of course, in a game that relies on randomness, and we're trying to reduce that by unit choices and the right buffs and more reliability. Do you feel like, where do you sit on this spectrum? Do you like that there's kind of this catch-up mechanic that could happen if someone plays Twists and Turns particularly well, knowing that it can go randomly? Is that a good impact on the game in a world's level competitive setting? Or would you ever set that up if you had a tournament? Would you ever pick something like that just to kind of mix it up?
Well, first off, I'm just like Tom said, I'm glad I didn't have to make that decision in this case because there's so many moving parts there, and you're dealing with a lot of people that are how do you say this? They're like the top dogs of their community. They always have they always make the right choices for their community, for their events, and now we have to tell them what to do, and that's there's a lot of egos there. So I think it's not a bad thing that there's some democratic system there. That said, I mean, the randomness of the missions, I think it's a difficult line to draw because sure enough, the mission can be random and it can totally twist the game up. But on the other hand, you have things like terrain maps, and all the terrain pieces have to be exactly the same and have the same size, and you can't have an advantage there, and etc. etc. Whilst, I mean, if you put like a baked castle in the middle of the board, it can change the game just as much as Twist and Turns can do, I think. So where do you draw that line? I mean, to me, it would have been better if the missions were not included, but I think in the end, having it in a democratic fashion decided, I think that's the right call. I mean, they made their bed and now they sit in it,
Right. So
it's interesting to me, like Twists and Turns in particular. As a captain, you've got a mission that can come just down to dice, right? If you believe that your team is better than the other teams, you don't want that mission, right? Because you bet on your players being able to beat the opponent's players and not the mission being able to beat them. Whereas if you believe that your team is worse, you want as much randomness as you can to get those points. So the fact that all of the captains voted for it says that they were very unconfident or not confident in their team's abilities, I think.
Or maybe they
thought...
Sorry, go ahead.
The classic example was the Twists and Turns game with Tom Guan from the US against Fabian from Team England. Two top players. Tom had Ogres and Fabian had KO. I believe both sides expected that to be a very, very massive whitewash for Team England. KO should destroy Ogres every single time. And I believe at the bottom of turn 2, the Ogres had been tabled and hadn't killed a single model on the table. But they won 15-5 because the board then the randomness just kicked in and KO could not score a point for the rest of the game. And that's just, it's not great in a competitive environment.
Yeah, one of the things that I think about sometimes, and maybe this is just the kind of list I play, but is that kill points or something, if that was somehow factored into the victory point system in GW, it would seem to level out those kinds of things, like where it's not just about playing the objectives well. And I get it. Like, you can make a case that the game is not about killing things. It's about movement and holding objectives. Totally fair. But again, it's kind of a little counterintuitive to what, like, exactly the situation you just said. Do you guys see GW ever moving in the direction of giving you any amount of credit for what you've killed?
No.
No?
No.
In fact, I mean, if you look at the battle tactics from a year ago, so not the GHB were currently in the one before, there were a lot of battle tactics which were kill something.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look at the battle tactics for the current GHB, or the one coming out now, there's very little kill something.
Yeah.
They seem to be moving further and further away from kill things, which is great because, yeah, I play Khorne, which is not, despite what people think, it's not a killy army, it's a denial army. And I also have Nurgle, not a killy army, it's a survival army. And why should those armies pay a price for playing the game differently? You know, if my style of play or my army is built around not letting you do something instead of being able to kill something, then that's perfectly valid. That's a fair way to play the game.
Okay. Yeah. Michael, any thoughts?
Yeah, I would just agree with what Tom said. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. For me, and like on Warhammer Weekly, Vince, as from like a game designer standpoint, likes to talk about. I'm blanking on the term. It's a fancy like game, theory of games, not game theory term that has to do with a kind of dissonance that happens with the game doesn't necessarily line up with what you think the game wants to do. And so, like, for example, that the whole spell casting being successful, but then it's only technically successful if you did your part right, and then unbinding is its own separate thing that has nothing to do with success. But the functional feeling of what success should be is that you cast it and it went through, right? That feels, and that's why that dissonance comes up so much. Ludonarrative dissonance is what it's called.
Yeah.
And so there's a part of me that always wants GW to get closer and closer to making things the way they seem like they want to be. And I guess in some sense they're getting there. I don't know. It seems like the battle tomes in general have been heading in a more, this is what the army feels like it wants to do. You can make an argument that Gargants, especially in this last season, totally doesn't feel like it has a place. Maybe it does in this next one, but if it's true that wizards are really so important, maybe they don't. I know that there's also buffs for having no wizards in your army. How do you guys feel about this in general? Is there any rule or dissonance, the ludonarrative type dissonance, that you guys wish GW would start kind of tuning things up a little bit more so things lined up the way they feel to you?
So my short answer is no, and that's because my feel for how things should be is based upon the rules as they are. So I don't read any bit of lore for Warhammer at all. You know, I don't pay any attention to the fluff or anything like that. And so, you know, I picked up Nurgle before the current book.
Yeah.
And everyone always used to tell me, you know, Nurgle doesn't play right because they're so fast. Well, I'm like, well, my whole experience of Nurgle is that they're the fast army. So I'm okay with that. Nurgle are fast. Fine. Who cares?
Sure.
You know, just because your interpretation of the fluff is that they shouldn't be, that doesn't change how they actually play on the table. So my dissonance isn't there because, you know, Khorne, yes, it's got big red monsters, but they're a denial army.
Yeah.
That's fine.
Yeah.
Who cares?
I mean, not to be that guy, but it sounds like that's the right answer someone who is a big tournament organizer ref should give, is you really believe in the rules, and I get that. I get that too. Do you generally, Tom, agree that the battle tomes, I saw you nod, I don't know if that was in reaction to this, that the battle tomes have been heading in that direction, where GW seems to be more aware of trying to, you know, tighten those bands around the experience of what you think something should do? Like Nurgle is a good example. It does feel like it's tighter, or more like what the lore would say nowadays.
Yeah, I think. I mean, I don't know whether they're fitting their lore better, but they are fitting. Other than perhaps Slaves, most of the recent books in the last year have been very centered around one style of play. Now, whether that style of play matches the lore or not, I don't know. But I like the fact that they're not trying to give every book able to do everything.
Mm-hmm.
Khorne is a denial army. Yeah, Nurgle is the slow buff army. Zincha magic, etc., etc.
Yeah. Michael, do you have any thoughts on like something you'd like to see GW tighten up with the ludonarrative dissonance, or any opinions on what we've been talking about there over?
Not any specific things I would like to see tightened up, but when you read the lore, because Tom doesn't read the lore, but when you read the lore, every army is the best. They all are the best warriors. They all have the best strategists, or whatever. So that's something you cannot really home into, I think. But other than that, I do think this is the right approach, because otherwise, how will you differentiate between Iron Jaws and Khorne, Flesh Eaters? It's all the same. It's all a bunch of dudes that just go in and smack. They may have a priest or a wizard, but
right.
There's nothing really different there. So they have to differentiate in the rules. Otherwise, what's the point, really?
Right. This does kind of steer us in the direction of the rock, paper, scissors element to what AOS is increasingly becoming, at least in my opinion, where, Tom, what you were saying, that not every army is doing everything, and therefore they counter each other more directly. And this is obviously a big part of Worlds, too, with the pairing system. Obviously, most of the tournament stuff that we're seeing in a given year is not teams tournaments. It's single tournaments. How does this color the experience of this rock, paper, scissors thing from that perspective? Obviously, teams that have really good pairing people behind their pairings process like the rock, paper, scissors-ness that we're going into. But I imagine that people who want to just go crush face at a singles tournament at GT probably are less happy with randomly. It might feel like twists and turns, where you randomly get put up against an army that you're notoriously supposed to lose, or at least you have a huge, kind of deficit there from the get-go. What are we feeling about that? Does that feel like it's heading in the right direction for singles play in tournaments?
I'm okay with it. I don't organize chess tournaments. If every army is perfectly balanced, you just end up with a chess tournament, and that's not particularly interesting or exciting. As long as there are always some options for competitive players to have an all-comers sort of list, and I think there still are, then you're fine. There are ways around it, and so yeah, I quite like the rock paper scissors nature. It makes the game more interesting, more fun.
Yeah, I do too. Michael, do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I agree. Obviously, when you look at the lists of worlds, it's much more skewed in a specific direction. Any sane singles tournament player wouldn't play a list with 17 Sentinels in their Luminef list, but at Worlds it was possible, because of the way it works. But yeah, if you play that list at the tournament and you get countered, that's what you signed up for that to be possible, at least. You can write it out and not have it happen, but yeah, sure.
Right.
It also gets the fun dynamic of, there is a time where Gitz, Squig Herd are strong, and you're going into a singles tournament where if I'm going to win this tournament, I'm probably going to have to beat 2 or 3 Gitz players. And so you build a list that is not good against most armies, but is really good against that. And that's a really fun dynamic to see in a tournament happen, where you've got some player who is just knocking out the good armies, maybe lose to a bad army, but he's knocking out the good armies. And that's fantastic to see.
Right. You mentioned chess. The ELO system that we see in chess is something that I'm always intrigued by. For those at home that don't know what this system is, it's essentially a way to kind of keep your strength of schedule going from your whole career as a player based off of your win-loss record against people, against their win-loss record and what they expected performance you were supposed to have against a given person. So your kind of ranking can go up or down based off of how much you crush someone that was better than you, does a lot better than someone that's not expected to do as well. Is there any kind of like light at the end of the tunnel or expectation here that we'll ever get something like that for at least Worlds level play in Warhammer? Is it just too hard to manage that?
It's not. I mean, there have been attempts. I've seen a number of ELO systems for Warhammer created, and even more so for 40k. But they just don't work, and it's primarily just due to a lack of data. If you have a top chess tournament, or Magic the Gathering, which has a similar thing, the players coming into that have probably got over 100 games on their belt, and so you're able to rank them on that. You go to any Warhammer tournament, there will be people there, well, it's their first tournament, or they've played 2 tournaments that year, and they may be great players, but they've only played 2 tournaments. Michael said he's going to do 5 tournaments a year. He's a good player. He turns up to that 6th tournament, he's got 18, 30 games under his belt. That's not enough to get a good ranking system. So the lack of data means that you cannot have any ELO system for Warhammer.
So it's a little implicitly...
we can't play 20 games in one day.
Exactly. So we can't. I mean, the game just is 3.5 hours long. It's just not possible. Even if you counted everything you did at home, and it was somehow like monitored so that you played like correctly and you reported everything correctly, it's just not possible. That's fair. In thinking about kind of that also margin of error of when we look at these, like Honest Wargamer Rob and his team obviously is involved with stats from tournaments around the world, and GW has their own kind of version that overlaps with it. We're talking to an econometrist. What is the English
econometrician?
Econometrician is what it is. In Dutch, it's something a little different. But so you're we're talking to someone who knows what they're talking about here, and I've seen so many people complain from the GW version of it, where they'll have different bands of kind of like the error that they might have depending on which army it is. So some will be plus minus 7 of the percentage that they give. Some will be plus or minus 11. Some people be like, oh, that's too wide of a band for like GW doesn't know what they're talking about. And I'm always like, you guys, the alpha that we're setting, the confidence, the significance level here is such that with every army has a different sample size based off of what has actually been reported, and the ones that are tighter bands are the ones we have a higher sample size for, and we have a like more confidence in. Do you want to throw your 2 cents in on that, Tom, while we've got someone here that knows what they're talking about?
You've explained it pretty well. I will say, the Games Workshop ones in particular, the very first Meta Watch for Sigmar video that they put out that explained the data, Matt Rose, the guy who was being interviewed, he made it very clear that he knows what he's talking about with data science, and they hired some people, or they have some people on board who know what they're doing, so that they're not just throwing those numbers out. They are calculated properly, I believe, based from the videos that we've seen. But yeah, I mean, it's not a surprise that Stormcast and Slave to Darkness have very narrow bands because they're the most popular armies, and you get more data. And then some of the armies that nobody plays, Cruel Boys, etc., have much wider bands because we just don't know how good they are.
Right.
There's not enough data.
Yeah. Michael, the tournaments you tend to run, and you're seen in northeastern Belgium, the Dutch-speaking, Flemish-speaking part, for those that don't know at home. It's not a particularly large scene. Do you feel like when you're running events, and thinking about who you see that comes out on top of these events a lot of times, because it's a smaller sample size of people, and there's do you see it varying more wildly, or do you have some of the same people winning all the time in your scene?
I think there's definitely people that win more of the time. I mean, I think there's players that go a lot to the French tournaments in the Walloons, that go to the Dutch tournaments in the Netherlands, that go over the border. And most of those people are also the people that winning the tournaments locally. I mean, most of the tournaments are 1 dayers at our end, because we have, as you said, we have a small community. So getting people to play for 2 days, it's always a bit of a stretch for a lot of people, because they're not really that involved. So yeah, sometimes you have that one guy that just get lucky because it's only 3 games and he just has 3 amazing games and then he wins the tournament. But most of the times it's consistent because, I mean, for instance, we have a fairly competitive scene in Brugge. I think you go to a tournament in October over there.
Yep.
And they have like a club where they can play each other regularly, and you really feel that the level of skill is much higher there compared to other scenes in Flanders. So most of the time it's guys from that part of Flanders that tend to stand in the top 5.
Right, that's fair. And Tom, this kind of like bridges into a question that as the one of the 2 American players that plays over in the Benelux region that I'm aware of, Nick, who was playing for Team the Netherlands, Nick Fry, is the other one, my best buddy here. I get asked a lot, what's going on with this perceived notion that the American players have a really weird meta, and or that the scene, and I don't mean the world's level players, but you hear this quite often, that America's kind of its own beast, and you're seeing it both as someone who's lived there for 20-something years, but also a bit as an outsider. You've done tournaments around the world, I guess, now, or been involved with things. Do you have an insight? I've got my own theory as to why the American meta might be kind of different, but before I throw my ideas into the pot, do you have any kind of reactions there? I know Honest Wargamer Rob sometimes is joking about it, but I think there's a hint of truth to what he's getting at.
So the first thing I'd say, and this gets asked to me a lot, is that from a European to say the American meta is a fundamental lack of understanding of the US.
Sure.
Some of the events on the East Coast are closer to London than they are to California. The US is a very, very large place, and to have the idea that there is just one meta that this huge, giant continent participates in is just ludicrous. And there are pockets of players, in the Midwest who just play, and they'll have 100-player tournaments, but they don't travel because it's a 6-hour flight to get to another tournament. So they just play in their own little area, and they'll play a meta that is very different from the West Coast, the East Coast, or anywhere else. So there is no American meta because it's just way too big to have that. And on top of that, I've heard that I think it's something like 65% of all Sigmar players in the world are in the US. Right, so it's a huge scene, right? And both geographically and in terms of number of players. So you can't just say that there is a single US meta. And if you view that most of the players in the world, the majority of the players in the world are in the US, it isn't the US meta that's weird, it's the British meta, or it's the continental European meta. Like, those are the minorities.
Right.
It just so happens that the Honest Wargamer is based in the UK and has a very UK-centric point of view, and that, I'm British, so I'm saying that as a Brit.
Right.
But, so that's my take on it.
And to be fair, Worlds, which of course this video is ostensibly about, is covering a largely European-inspired kind of competition. Obviously, a good chunk of the countries come from just Europe, and isn't as worldwide as we'd like to see it grow to be, with Asia involved, and who knows where else. That I don't even know what the scene's like in South America, for example. That would be amazing to get some of those teams involved, and who knows what kind of scene you have and what meta there. I think one of my things is definitely, I agree with you that the distance, a lot of people don't have a good sense for how hard it is to get to a tournament in the States and how infrequently they're happening from, say, like I'm from Atlanta, and Atlanta just doesn't have that many tournaments. Obviously, the GW is hosting the big thing coming up in November, right before Thanksgiving this year there, but that's kind of random that's happening. And getting around to those tournaments and playing, my experience or my kind of what I've seen of that American situation is if you don't have a lot of people that are within a certain driving distance of you, you're going to be playing against a very kind of niche-y meta of basically just friends who get together, and sometimes they're going to play weird lists. Rob talks about weird lists all the time that are coming out of the States, and I don't think that's because, it's necessarily a huge meta. It might be a reflection of some people who just do it for the hobby and just enjoy doing it, and that sometimes those weird lists can end up plowing through a tournament and you surprise someone. I know they often say about Bill Souza that he's one of these guys that can play the weird lists really, really successfully, but that's I feel like exactly what you said. People don't have a sense for kind of how American getting around and just connecting with people. Like, how does the Worlds team even train? Are you personal friends with those guys from before they ended up on the Worlds team? Like this kind of goes into the hot topic that I really want to talk about with our resident Belgian and American who comes from originally a conglomeration of countries that gets to have four that get to participate in Worlds. Is there a version of reality where we get two Belgian teams? And why not, if America's 65% of the AoS playing meta, why not have regional American teams for Worlds? So I'm unleashing this on you guys, and I'm not going to tell my own personal opinion on this. But we do see that at least one country in the world gets to have four countries. So it could be a thing, right?
Yeah. Asking a Welshman whether he thinks that Britain is one country and should only have one team is a very, very dangerous line to walk on.
I know what yeah.
I can absolutely see the argument for the US having multiple teams, and yet, most of their practicing is done via TTS. They have a handful of meetups a year. I mean, I think it's well known that the US team says if you want to play for our team, you have to be willing to spend over $10,000 because it's not just the flight to get to Worlds itself and the hotel, but obviously the two meetups and everything else involved. It's extremely expensive, and that does narrow it down. But I quite like the fact that the world. You look at the World Cup for football. Brazil doesn't get to have two teams, or the US doesn't get to have three teams, etc. So I like the way that it is currently done. If the US was dominating and won every single year because they had such a large number of players to pull from, then maybe from a competitive point of view you'd want to do it. But they finished 7th this year. I'm fine with the way it is.
Yeah.
That's my argument to that.
Okay, fair. Okay, Michael, do you want to wade into this? Jonas and I have already kind of thrown our 2 cents on the other videos, but do you think it's possible to split up Belgium into 2 teams?
Well, I mean, it's there's different arguments there because of course it's a bit ridiculous on one end because it's such a small country and the scene isn't that big, so to split it up again, that's a bit weird. But of course, there's the language barrier is there. I mean, it's a thing. There's a reason why the 2 communities. I mean, there's some crossover, but it's limited. I think that's a fair thing to say. So there could be an argument there because right now, basically most of the Belgian team, if not all of them, are French speaking. And I can imagine, let's say that tomorrow there's a really good Flemish player, it would be really hard for him to get in the team just for communication's sake and, getting well acquainted with the group, etc. That could be a problem, but I don't see it as that much of a problem that it really validates having 2 teams for Belgium. Not really. I think those are issues that can be easily solved. I think there's enough goodwill in the community to just make one team. And if people from Flanders feel like they're left behind, then they just have to step up their game and apply themselves. That's and then they will get there. I mean, they can't be ignored if they apply themselves.
Or maybe play as a mercenary for someone else too. That's always an option.
Yeah, maybe get some experience playing for the Netherlands, for instance, or something. That would be an easy go-to thing. And then, who knows?
Yeah, for example, my not only was I a mercenary, but my favorite game at Worlds was against Freddie Leggett's Cities List, and he's and hopefully I get this right, Englishman who was playing for Northern Ireland as a mercenary for them. And do I have that right, Tom? Am I on the right track finally?
I believe so.
Okay,
yes.
okay. And anyway, obviously the meta for the 4 countries that come from the United Kingdom, obviously they can kind of mix and match a little bit if they need to, as we saw in that case. Yeah, I don't particularly have a strong dog in the fight. I just would like to see Worlds continue to get even bigger and having more participants. I know Honest Wargamer Rob was talking about splitting or making smaller teams and having multiple teams from countries. That might make it a little bit more interesting from a list building perspective and less easy to kind of pair into everything where everyone's got the Gits player and everyone's got the Lumineth and Zinch and whatnot. I could see an argument for that too. Do you guys see any legs in that, or is it going to stay 8-person teams for the rest of the foreseeable future?
Yeah, I disagree that, going into Worlds, you figured that Gits, Lumineth, KO were the strong ones, and if you have 4-man teams, then every team is going to have those. Mm-hmm. What was interesting at Worlds was not the fact that everyone had Gits, KO, and Lumineth. It was the other things that you saw. Like Team America bringing Seraph on, they were the only ones. That's cool, right? You wouldn't see that in a 4-man team.
Yeah.
So I think it widens it up more and makes list building even more interesting, having the larger teams.
Yeah.
And I think, there's been talk about, making it so that it's just it's a big teams tournament rather than one team per country. I think that dilutes the brand and makes it less of what it is. It is. You are playing for your country. You are the number 1 team for your country. That makes it. You don't see teams having multiple teams at the World Cup for football or rugby or anything else like that. It's just, this is the national team. You're representing the country. Go for it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I mean, the last day everyone is wearing a different jersey, but that's no other story. So.
Yeah. Nice. Did you guys get jerseys from different countries, players? Did they swap? I know I saw some players wearing refs jerseys at some point, but did it go the other way around?
I did not, no.
No.
Yeah, I did get one. I think it was from Switzerland. Yeah.
Nice.
So.
Okay, guys. So in the interest of wrapping it up sooner than later, I was thinking maybe we could do a kind of flash round where we maybe do like a wish list of different things we'd like to see. So be thinking right now about maybe some rules you would really like to see GW switching in the future. Maybe that could be one thing we ask. Another could be like what you'd like to see change about Worlds, if anything, for next time. Maybe if it's not hosted in one of the countries it's already been hosted in, what's a country you'd like to see it hosted in? Like, let's assume you're going and you'd enjoy being there, or you think it'd be a good for the community. So how about those 3 things? Rules change. Rules change. I've already forgot what the first one is. Rules change. A country, and then what was my other thing? Do you remember?
Well, so Games Workshop rules change and Worlds rules change.
That's right. Worlds rules change. Yeah. Or some, it doesn't have to be about rules. It could be anything about Worlds that you'd like to see change.
Sure.
Okay, so Michael, you feel like you can answer one of those right now?
Let's see. Rules changes for the next edition, I guess. Well, a big one is terrain rules. I think those really need. I mean, just do something with it. I mean, there's a reason we had a lot of impassable terrain at Worlds. Saved us a lot of trouble as refs, but I think GW should do better.
Okay, that's fair.
Can't be that hard.
Like, honestly, locally, we don't even play with most of the mysterious type stuff very often at tournaments. Maybe Arcane, but it's usually just looking at impassable and overgrown.
Mm-hmm.
Tom, do you have a thing you'd like to see GW change rules on, like your big wish list?
Yeah, coherency stroke daisy chaining. Hate it. Getting that. Oh, I need to have a line of 20 guys because they're going to get a buff from one guy who's back in my territory, but I hate it. So anything that gets rid of that.
Is that just making everything wholly within type bubbles for buffs, or is that also including perhaps making coherency like bigger for certain size bases, like based off of your base size, so that you don't have to play, that kind of game where you're in Galician veterans just so everyone can fight? Is that kind of in the direction?
I don't know. I don't like Holly within bubbles. They annoy me, so I'm okay with not having that. The Yeah, if you've got a unit of 40 stabbers or something, if you've got them lined that in one line, or you've got them 2 ranks deep, I don't. It's still daisy chaining in my mind, having it 2 ranks deep. So the change in coherency so that 25 millimeters don't, still have to be within range of 2 bases doesn't do much for me.
Okay.
But
Sure.
yeah, there's a reason that they're paid to write the rules. They can come up with something.
Sure. Yeah. Okay, Michael. Something you'd like to see change about Worlds for next year?
Don't really have anything to add there. I'm afraid it's nothing on the top of my head that I want to change.
Perhaps getting rid of the crazy missions. I think you said that you probably wouldn't have them there.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, sure.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to echo what you've already said, so maybe that counts as your answer. Okay, Tom, what are you thinking?
I would like, and this is not rules based at all, but I would like an organized. I don't want to use the word party, but social event at the end of the occasion.
Oh yeah.
So the last night, at Worlds we had the venue was amazing. There was a separate bar sofa area that was huge.
Yeah.
Just have a organized thing. Every team go there, hang out, celebrate the wins, celebrate or commiserate the losses, and just there's a thing with Worlds that a lot of people view it as a way to meet friends that they haven't seen since last year, which is great. But like the Danes, for example, didn't want to go out drinking on the nights before they were playing because they're taking it seriously. But at the end, they really wanted to party because they'd won the whole thing. But a lot of people had just, gone back to their rooms, etc. So having an organized celebration of the event at the end would be great.
That's a fantastic idea.
Yeah.
Michael, if you come up with another one, feel free to add it in. But in the meantime, do you have a location for next year or in the future that you would like? I know that there's talk about eventually doing it again in the Netherlands, so I'm not trying to undercut that. But if it can't be or doesn't get voted for that, what are you thinking? What would you like?
I mean, yeah, the Netherlands would be really convenient for me, obviously. As long as it has decent food and decent showers and rooms, then it's okay for me. I mean, somewhere sunny, that would be nice. Somewhere like really sunny Spain or something, that would be nice.
Even if that means no AC in the hall?
Mm.
That could get dangerous. Yeah.
Let me go north. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Nice. Did you, Michael? Were you actually visiting? Like, you live close enough to Amsterdam. If you want to go see Amsterdam, you could see it whenever you want. But do you see this opportunity as like when you went to the Czech Republic to Prague? Did you see that as an opportunity to actually see the city some and play tourist a bit, or is it kind of just I'm on the job, I'm doing my thing?
Well, at that moment, it wasn't really possible for me because I just started a new job, so I couldn't get much days of holidays or. I just did the event and that's it. And yeah, like you said, Amsterdam, I didn't really have to visit that. But yeah, like next year, I'm actually going to make it a holiday, I think.
Right. Too many vending machines with sex toys in it, huh? Yeah.
Yeah.
For those that watched our table talk earlier, Jonas and I were chatting about that this was a kind of a nickname we made for Michael. That his nickname would be vending machine. So anyway, it's a kind of an inside joke. But there were actually at the hotel this year. Tom, I don't know if you saw them. I never. But Michael showed us proof of them existing. But there were vending machines for adult entertainment toys, which is pretty crazy. I don't know if that's an Amsterdam thing or if it's just that hotel, but I've never seen that before.
Yeah, they were. So I brought my family, my wife and my 10-year-old daughter.
Oh man!
And Tom and the team were nice enough to set us up with a family room. So it was a family bedroom.
Yeah.
That was full of large adverts for the sex toys. Only in Amsterdam.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, honestly, you don't see any evidence of that walking around where I live in Amsterdam. So it might be that hotel, but who knows?
Yeah.
Okay, so close this out, Tom. What would your preferred location be if it's not going to be the Netherlands or somewhere else? We've already done it.
Yeah, anywhere in Europe would be good. I quite like the idea of Southern Europe, maybe Spain or south of France or something like that, or Southern Italy would be good. Somewhere on the Mediterranean would be a bit different. I heard a lot of people, particularly those coming from the US or those coming from Australia, for example. It is a vacation, a holiday. They're traveling around the world, and the venue for this year's Worlds was fantastic. I do love that venue. But if you wanted to see Amsterdam, it wasn't. You couldn't just step outside the hotel in the evening and go and experience the country. If you wanted to go experience Amsterdam or any other part of the Netherlands, it was a trip to do that. So you'd have to come early and spend some days doing that.
Yeah.
Which I did, but a lot of the players didn't. So I do. Again, I really liked that. It's probably the best venue I've ever seen for a Warhammer tournament in itself. But if you could lift that up and place it in the middle of a city somewhere, it would be even better.
I understand. Yeah, it was a little tricky. As someone who literally came into town every day from Amsterdam using public transportation and the shuttles, it's definitely doable, but it's going to eat more time than... It's definitely not what you were saying is you just step out of the hotel and magically you're there, That's just too expensive, and an event space like that in Amsterdam would be crazy. Like, if people thought the price this year was high, it would be astronomical if that was the case. But yes, I agree. Right. I get what that's all about. I actually bumped in. I was showing one of my Serbian team members around the day after Worlds was done, and we bumped into most of Team Northern Ireland, which was really lovely to see them walking around the more touristy parts of Amsterdam. So I know that at least they got out and got to see it. Did you get a chance to, Tom? To get out with the family?
So I was in Amsterdam for I think 8 days, and during the whole thing. So my family definitely got to see. Yeah. They actually went outside of Amsterdam as well and traveled around a bit. But yeah, I spent 2 days exploring the city. Great. And then we actually went over to Switzerland for 2.5 weeks as well. So we made it a whole family vacation.
That's so awesome. Okay, well, guys, thank you so much for your time today. Hopefully you've had as good a time as I have. It's lovely talking to you, and Tom, getting to talk to you a little bit more. Michael and I will keep seeing each other. We just saw each other in a tournament a week and a half ago. But it's hopefully we all get to reunite for the next one. And if I ever do get to make it out to the States to play some tournaments in California, I grew up in Orange County, by the way, so in Atlanta.
Yep.
So if I ever make it back over there for some reason, I'll have to hit you up and we'll put something together. But anyway, thank you so much, guys. Anything you want to say on the way out?
Thank you for having me.
It's fun.
Yeah, for sure. And and Tom, I definitely want to get you on sometime if you're up for it to talk statistics stuff. So that would be real fun.
So I actually run my Warhammer team that I run is only people allowed in it are people who have a graduate degree in economics or econometrics. So you're more than welcome to join Econohammer.
I need to. That sounds amazing. Yeah, I'm literally working right now on a future video on when you should fish for GoTrek based off of a binomial distribution of setting different precedents for how many normal hits should go through before you reroll everything, and how many procs you should let go through before you reroll everything.
One of our team shirts on the back has a game theory grid on how you should score best sports.
Okay, nice. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
I love it. You need to put me in touch with this group. I want to be a part. All right. Anyway, guys, it was lovely, and we'll have you both back on at some other point in the near future. Thanks.
Right.
Thanks, Ryan.
Okay. And there we have it. Hopefully you guys enjoyed that one. I know I did. The audio quality is hopefully also a little bit better from your perspective. As I kind of alluded to, I have a Mac. Jonas usually is doing the recordings on a PC, which, if you don't know, Macs just are way worse at recording internal audio. You kind of have to do a third-party plugin and all this kind of stuff. So hopefully it was a step up. I'm not a particularly big fan of wearing headphones on video, but if that's the way forward, then that's what we can do. In the meantime, though, guys, before we get some more content out, please feel free to like, share, and subscribe, as we've been always saying in these videos. Hopefully it's not getting too redundant. And join us in the comments in Discord. Jonas is more active in the Discord, and I'm more active in the comments section. So would love to see you guys there to chat with both of us. And until next time, guys, as always, Ryan out.